Well, good morning and welcome to Focus Today. We are delighted to have with us today a gentleman that certainly needs no introduction, and it's great to have him back with us, Jordan Sekulow, who is the Executive Director of ACLJ. And I'm sure you've seen him on TV, heard him on the radio, read some of his articles. And I have one question for you, Jordan, before we get started. Was it Coke or Pepsi?
That was Diet Coke. That's how it started today here on the East Coast, especially after last week. Need a little boost to keep the engines running. But it's interesting here in Washington. Congress isn't back yet, but there's enough scandals and new political stories, I guess, that everybody, you realize America's a great country, Perry, because elections are very important. But we move on, and we got a lot of work to do, and things happen. Well,
I kind of want to run through some of these with you. I mean, here we are a week later. Can you believe what happened? Because it seems to be contrary to what the polls were saying.
It's very tough. Personally, and this is not with the ACLJ, but I actually worked for Mitt Romney in 2008, going back to 2006. So I was an early supporter and had been with his campaign in the last presidential race. The first win for Mitt Romney was getting through that presidential primary, which was very difficult and a kind of nasty Republican primary. And, through the summer, things were not looking so great. He was raising plenty of money, but the polls weren't shifting. But I think we all got this kick of hope the last 6 weeks of the campaign when you had the debates and some of the foreign policy blunders of the Obama administration. And it sort of affected the polls. But what we saw again, like the last election, different than most, is that President Obama's got enough supporters, a core base. I always said, if he can turn out 80% of where he was at in 2008, he can't be beat. Doesn't matter what's happening. He just has to turn out those people. And he did it again. And I don't think the polls took into account these voters. And it requires a bit of a wake-up call, I think, for conservatives, whether you are a strong supporter of Mitt Romney or not. If you wanted to see President Obama defeated and you want to see conservative policies move forward, obviously there's got to be at least a new messaging style, a new way of communication, if not policy changes.
Well, early in the evening, Jordan and I was watching, and I thought, well, when he didn't win Massachusetts, that was the beginning of the dominoes, so to speak. And then Ryan didn't take Wisconsin. And then, of course, Pennsylvania went. It was pretty much over at that point.
Pennsylvania is always tough, Perry. I worked for the Bush reelection effort in 2004 for the Bush-Cheney campaign and was in Pennsylvania the final few weeks of that campaign. Some of that is a GOP strategy to make sure that the Democrats are having to spend money there, whoever the Democrat candidate is. And so you say, hey, look, it's tightening. Polls usually show it. It's a big state, so if you poll a certain way, you could show a tight election, but a close election there with a 2% margin is hundreds of thousands of votes. So it's a wide margin. For me, it was the fact that North Carolina wasn't called early in the night. I mean, that is a state that did go to President Obama in 2008, but that was a blowout election. That shouldn't. I mean, the Republican governor, the nominee there, he won like within 30 minutes of the polls closing. They had called that race, and they wouldn't call Mitt Romney. And of course, Florida as well. Florida, no one expected to see President Obama carry that. That wasn't even part of his must-win election strategy. It was a tough night, and it was a tough path to victory. You had to win all of those states. Florida, people have heard this, I know, a few times. Virginia, again, President Obama turned it out, even though there's a strong Republican leadership in the state level there, governor, state, the General Assembly there, the state Senate there. You had to get Ohio. You had to get Colorado, and those, it just wasn't falling, and the margins were decent enough to know. I didn't think it was going to be that early of a night, honest.
Jordan, I'm sure you're like us, watching some of these exit polls coming out, who voted, who didn't vote, how many didn't vote, and the various things. And yet you look at the Obama administration's track record and you kind of shake your head and say, how come this guy wasn't defeated? I mean, he just has negatives all over the place and his policies are zero. And yet, fewer people turned out on this election. Fewer people voted for Obama this last go-around than the previous '08 election. And I guess the shocker is we're seeing upwards of 6 million proclaiming evangelicals voting for Obama. So has there been a philosophical paradigm shift in this country?
The evangelical vote is still strong in the Republican circle, the conservative nominee, and it's been very cultivated by conservative leaders, Christian leaders, because that's where they get a seat at the table. I mean, it's not, you don't have to be a Republican Party faithful member as an evangelical to understand why it's in your best interest a lot of times, because whether you vote for the Democrat or Republican, if you're out there supporting the Democrat, you're likely, if you look at their policies, not going to have a lot of influence. So in 2008, President Obama's campaign focused a lot on evangelicals, especially those under 35. You have to remember, in that number, sometimes included are minority evangelicals, and so that, of course, had a huge effect in this election, one that I think people didn't see coming quite the same way as it did in 2008. If you look at going back to President Bush, who was really cultivated the evangelical vote, Mitt Romney hit those numbers and sometimes surpassed them. So what you saw, I think, was not so much a shock in the evangelicals. There will always be those evangelicals who will vote a certain way. I think those under 35 still influenced a lot by the early President Obama. But generally speaking, this turnout number, I think, was very telling, Perry. I think people are disenfranchised. They're just kind of disappointed in the way things have gone. First, it was the health care law, and then there was the Republican sweep, and then nothing. And along with no domestic policy, really, you've had foreign policy, serious questions. And now, even more this week, is this latest scandal, which doesn't appear to be partisan in nature, but again is one of those another one of those issues that comes up and makes people shrug their shoulders and say, you know what, Washington D.C. it doesn't really matter. This is how it works.
It's kind of been said, Jordan, that Obama really lost the election, but Mitt Romney didn't win the election. In other words, if you look at the number of votes and all of that, and what's so interesting to me now, I'm sure you're listening to the narrative like we are out there, that to say, oh, well, the Republicans need to change the tone, they need to change their message and all this and that. And yet I'm looking at this as somewhat as a political Pearl Harbor to the Republican Party, and it was a surprise, it was a blow up, but we will regroup and be stronger than we've ever had been before and just stay on the conservative trail.
Yeah, I think there are ways I think you can better reach Latino voters. I think, President Bush was trying to do some immigration reform back in 2004. A lot of evangelicals, very conservative evangelicals, have supported immigration reform that some in the conservative Republican movement would be very hesitant in the past to support, though now you're seeing more people come along. I mean, you had Sean Hannity, Charles Krauthammer. I've looked at the issue as well and said, if we're going to be serious about some of these issues, let's put proposals on the table that are for real about those people who are already here. But at the same time, let's see how legit the other side is. Are they willing to really provide border security first? Now, if we agreed to a two-part strategy in the same piece of legislation that said the day we have the border security reports coming in from our southern border, the next day we start this implementation policy. So it comes together. You don't have to worry whether that part will pass. Will that have any muster here in Washington? The House of Representatives, of course, could push that through the Republican side, but the Senate, and would President Obama support that? Or are we going to fall into some trap where this is just politics of the left, and they'd rather keep this group kind of in a sense in this state of feeling like they're under the wire, and that Latinos should be nervous or scared of conservatives, so they don't really want to get reform through?
Wow. Okay. Here we go. I don't know what we're in for. Are we in for a 4-year ride or a 2-year ride? Because midterm elections have a tendency to swing things back.
Yeah, here's where I think it's going to be clear. We've got the House of Representatives, so they're beholden to their constituents. They have to get reelected every 2 years. So what we're going to have to see very carefully come January, and even in the discussions now in this lame duck session, is are they willing to compromise more, and is that compromise okay? Is it the kind of compromise we'd all support at this point, or is it almost a kind of we give up? And I think what you're seeing right now is still plenty of conservatives who are not going to come to Washington and make deals with President Obama to raise taxes, and they're going to question seriously this administration. So if the House of Representatives remains fairly strong, hopefully you get some real piece of legislation through that our country needs that shouldn't be partisan. President Obama doesn't have to get reelected. He shouldn't be worrying the same way. But come 2 years later, so we're looking at 2014 elections here, Remember, the president's not done yet. And if he can switch the House of Representatives or come much closer, he may have a couple more years to govern where he could actually get more of his controversial, left-leaning, progressive policies through. You're not going to see that right now because of the Republican House. But let me tell you, I guarantee you the DNC and President Obama's political team, they're looking to 2014 right now to try to get him 2 more years of what he had his first about year and a half when he got Obamacare through, of an even slim Democrat majority, so he can put more legislation to and turn it into law.
Now, for those who did vote, he's one of like, what, 5 presidents that got returned to a second term at 50+% of the vote. So he's in a unique category. But if you look at the total amount of people voted, not he didn't swing the numbers, but he is going in with a mandate.
Well, he's got a less of a mandate than what happened in his first election.
Right.
The Democrats swept everything. So they barely got Obamacare through. He used a lot of political capital on that. And because of it, the 2010 elections came, and that was it. I mean, there's still a huge Republican majority in the House of Representatives, and they maintained that majority in every single race. Everybody in the House just got reelected or elected, and that's not the case in the Senate. In the Senate, the Democrats picked up a couple of seats, but that kind of remains, the balance of power remains. I'll tell you where it's tough. When you get to things like judicial nominations, we can talk about, that is very nervous now with this new makeup in the Senate. Jordan,
now, what's going to happen to Obamacare? What are we small business employers, what are we up for?
For the most part, it's going into effect. I mean, so we're going to see the full implementation likely of the health care law. You saw the Virginia governor, Bob McDonnell, just announced a couple of days ago that he was holding back, waiting for the election cycle, so they're going to use the federal exchange. They're not going to set up a state exchange. But as you can see, they know they have to at least move forward with some policy to comply with the law at a minimum. So we're going to see the health care law go into effect. There are still a lot of legal challenges out there. There are legal challenges to entire provisions of the law, still challenges to certain issues involving small businesses, some with the mandate, some with religious institutions. Obviously, I'd say on the regulatory side, not so much the substantive mandate side, which was considered called a tax by the Supreme Court back early this summer, that you're going to see the regulations challenge. Those are not passed by Congress, but they were delegated power to the executive branch to kind of make regulations that comply. And that we always thought was actually one of the more dangerous provisions when you have a 2,700-page law, is that it delegates. Most of the law is just regulatory into where the power goes. So you're going to see challenges to the panel that was going to set up, how much money goes to where, and there's been controversy over that. Is it, the death panel has been called before, but sorry, is it rationing care? So there's challenges to that. We've got challenges to the HHS mandate. We've got, I think, 3 of them right now in federal court representing private businesses, religious organizations, and those have not been flushed out yet. So there will be parts, and we keep fighting. And we have to remember that I think we have one more election cycle, maybe, to do something about this, and that would be, of course, the next presidential race. After that, I can't imagine in U.S. history, it's just hasn't happened before, that we'd repeal a social program like this, even if it's causing trouble. A lot of people are worried this will be so economically damaging that it will actually be the precursor to real universal health care, completely government run like Europe, where the rich, the wealthy have private doctors so they get whatever care they need. And those who rely on the government, it comes down to budgets. Think about austerity when it involves your health.
Wow. So, but it appears to me with all of these challenges, and even the challenge now that the Catholic Church is mounting up, if you start picking away bits and pieces of the law, what can they implement? I mean, what's left to implement, and how big of a mess is this going to be to manage?
A lot of change can happen the way this law works just based off elections, especially the executive branch. So I go back to, we have, the next election cycle, let's say a hypothetical Republican wins. They can go into office, like Mitt Romney was saying, if the support's still there, and dismantle a lot of the regulatory work. I mean, the HHS mandate is not law, so that you don't have to repeal it. You just say, we're not doing this anymore. And there's lots of provisions like that. You could give states waivers immediately for complying and say, You could come in a few years from now and say, you know what, this isn't working as the president, and say, because it's not working, I'm going to let states waive out the requirements right now, or small businesses or employers, and we're going to have to figure something else out immediately. So you still have some time, and people are very nervous. The one thing we'll see is, and this will still be a question, the way this law was designed, and it really goes into effect, Perry, obviously in a couple of years with full implementation. Is it going to have an immediate effect on people's pocketbooks, and especially their jobs, their employment, when it's full steam ahead? And if so, do people care? And I think what we saw in this election cycle, one of our attorneys who also has been a Romney supporter in his private life and a Harvard law grad, he wrote a piece for National Review right the day after the election saying, I just wonder if the way we cast it, if Americans, when you have this tough economic situation, are worried a little bit about this, I should just be self-reliant when they pay taxes and they feel like they should get something back from their government. Now you get national security, you get the biggest military in the world, but that maybe people are worried when we're cast as this way of, we want to get rid of all of the social programs and leave people on the street, which isn't true. Again, it goes back to messaging, and that's going to be very important. But unfortunately, we're going to see the main economic impacting provisions, the provisions that impact individuals with the mandate and tax penalty, and also small businesses, large corporations. We're going to see that all come into full force, unless it's a long shot. One of these cases that's still challenging the whole law goes through. So you can pick at pieces of it, but those are not the main core. The main core was the individual mandate.
All right, let's take a look at what potentially could be a problem for the president, and it's still the Benghazi issue. And now you got the whole Petraeus mess. Even the last 24 hours, it goes clear over to Afghanistan and takes in Lieutenant General Allen. I mean, this thing is really a mess. Could this give the president a broken wing if they actually uncover all this and find out that there was a cover-up?
I think there's two possibilities here. One, when I saw last night, it was right before I went to bed here on the East Coast, that now everybody's got conspiracy theories, but then you've got a guy who was going to be, the general just showed up in Washington yesterday because he was going to be confirmed, bipartisan support by the Senate, to be the head NATO commander of Europe.
Right.
So he was about to be elevated to, you look at countries like Russia, who complain a lot about NATO. He was going to move, into a much bigger international role dealing with our allies that are part of the Libya. So when it's not just Petraeus, but it's also the head general of Afghanistan, who in 3 days was going to be confirmed, and it's a woman who's connected to another. I think the options are, you can obviously speculate a lot about what's coming out or what could come out and what this may be all about. It could be simple as affairs and weird, twisted, these are people that were all close. Could be worse because you have the CIA direct people that have a lot of information. But I don't see it as a partisan issue yet. Here's why. If the president really wasn't told, as his advisors are saying, that they really didn't come to him until Petraeus did, that they did not tell him until the CIA director, even though they knew months ago the investigation had begun, I think that's a failure by his advisors that he should take care of. Wow. And I think that would be indicate that if he was really kept in the dark, and we know that the CIA and the FBI, sometimes they don't want to, they don't want to necessarily attack someone and cause more disruption than necessary. But you have to wonder, if this came out a week before the election, all of this is unraveling. I mean, more and more every hour. What kind of impact that had? Maybe it wouldn't have had a huge impact. Benghazi, obviously, that issue alone did not, though I'm not sure people fully grasp it when you talk about the general election and the amount of people that vote. But I'll tell you, it's not a partisan issue to me yet, but it's a dangerous issue. I think it makes the United States extremely vulnerable right now. Israel just opened up on basically possible two fronts over the weekend. Syria started firing into Israel with the crossover. Gaza, there could be a conflict there as early as Friday. All these 144 rockets have come down on Israel in 3 days. You've got the fall of our CIA director, the fall possibly of our head general in Afghanistan, winding up that effort and moving to NATO. Now he's not moving to NATO. That's been put on hold. That was supposed to happen in 3 days. If you are an enemy of the United States, or at least opposed to some of our policy, so I think it runs a spectrum from the most extremist groups, Perry, the Iranian-type governments to the Russias of the world, who may not be quite as a military threat, but certainly see us as a diplomatic and economic kind of challenge. This is when you take advantage, because whatever your plans were, think about the disarray this is causing in the highest branches of our intelligence and our armed forces. I mean, I believe in the American military, and I know there's it's mostly filled with great men and women who sacrifice. People are not perfect, but this one's really scary. I think it's just a bizarre situation. It keeps getting worse.
Jordan, put your lawyer hat on just for a moment, because there's two possibilities here. We're hearing now that General Petraeus could be charged, and I'm asking you as a lawyer, for what? Since he's no longer a government employee and he's a retired military guy, and because he's no longer a government employee and a retired military general, can they still send out a subpoena and bring him into these hearings?
They could send out a subpoena. Now, he could try to claim the fifth, and then that could take longer period of time. Why you look at these criminal investigations? Remember, the FBI does not get involved for affairs. That is not why the FBI, the CIA, things happen.
Yeah.
Most of the time, those are not the biggest issues of the day that the FBI is handling. That's more of a politician issue, a moral character judgment.
So what's the charges?
The charges, I think you look at, he knew about these threatening emails, these secret email accounts he had, it took the woman he was having an affair with, was threatening this other woman who he's friends with, who was having some inappropriate relationship at a minimum with the head of Afghanistan, the head general there, who was supposed to be confirmed this week. So the woman who reported this and acted like she was a victim kind of to the FBI is now tied to another general. So you think about, did he cover it up? Did he cover this up and go into the FBI? What's there in those emails? This has 20,000 pages of emails. So there's got to be something else there other than just the affair.
Jordan, you have filed the second lawsuit to protect Catholic businesses there in Illinois. Is that right?
Yeah, we have. I mean, we filed in Missouri. We filed in Illinois. I mean, there's a lot of lawsuits, and we've joined dozens of them when it comes to HHS mandate. And I think this is the beginning. We're going to start looking at more of the regulations, especially under the Obama administration. I think they may get a little bit more loosey-goosey, if you will, on the political outcomes, because they're not so concerned about that, at least not as much. They do have the midterms coming up. But if they could, I think, flaunt I'm not a Catholic and I'm not as internally connected, though we have lots of Catholic attorneys here at the ACLJ because of the pro-life issue. They were involved in that issue in the courts long before evangelicals and Protestants. So they've been litigating and fighting that battle a long time. And these are church attending, I would almost say evangelical Catholics, serious about their beliefs. And they were anticipating, I think, a lot more of a turnout from Catholics, not just white Catholics, but also across the board, because the messages that were being delivered by the bishops about how serious the HHS mandate was an attack on religious liberty. And I think what you saw is that, yes, Mitt Romney did a lot better with Catholics, white Catholics, than John McCain did, by about 8 percentage points better. So that's a decent swing, but nearly 60%. But when you add in the other Catholics across the country, those, of course, who don't attend churches regularly, they're still voting overwhelmingly for the left. And it means, again, one of these issues where either it didn't connect, or the church, has got their policy and they're faithful, but it doesn't really, extend to the others. I think the other issue is that, in a bizarre way, I think nationally, not for people who are really involved, not for conservatives, not who I'm talking to right now, but for Christians, but nationally, it was an interesting issue. I wrote about it, that it appears like the Obama team was very smart and capable. They were able to completely kind of, I'd say, hijack the issue as turn it from a religious liberty issue into a war on contraception, which, of course, turns off a lot of Protestants who don't really don't believe that this is somehow immoral or tantamount to abortion, and that this means that Republicans want to ban contraception. That's what conservatives want. And so they took something that could be extremely politically damaging to a core part of their base, the Catholic vote, who's more into the social justice and social welfare spending. Taxes are not as big of an issue, and instead turned into this war on women. And it was being mocked by conservatives, like, "Are you kidding me? This is not about contraception. It's about doing this to churches, and what do you do next, and how will it affect our, Baptist church next year? What will they do? Mandate something we'll have to do. So that message, of course, I don't think got through clear enough, and I don't think that was evangelicals' fault. I think that's conservatives and many Republicans who were not ready to talk about the issue, and the debate started raging. And the Obama team, they were very good at taking bad situations and turning it quickly enough to where you wake up the next day, and most people who aren't following it that closely, Perry, think that this is that the conservatives have done something wrong.
All right, let me ask you the messaging issue. All right, let's just take the social issues. You take the same-sex marriage, you take the life issue, and maybe even the immigration issue. Do we have a messaging problem as conservatives? I mean, why are we not resonating what we believe with compassion here?
Yeah, I think on all three, but especially life different. I would separate the HHS mandate from life. I think when you go through immigration, clearly the rhetoric that was used. I mean, we were part of the cases, the Arizona cases, but again, they were taking the rhetoric on things that I don't think were very controversial, and I don't think, honestly, many of these Latino leaders weren't that controversial, but they were using it for politics. And you see that from the biggest Latino groups in the country. They are leftist organizations. So they want to get Democrats elected. That's their goal. And they'll take any issue they can seize on. They can, and especially any issues involving Hispanics, Latinos, and they can, seize that for political purposes. So I think we have got to support some kind of comprehensive immigration, whether that's at least for those people who are here without criminal records. Of course, they violated the law to be here, but without criminal records, a certain period of time, something that at least can diffuse that. And of course, border security's got to come first, or else I think the conservatives alienate their entire base. So it's a careful one. On marriage, I think, for the first time we saw not only a marriage to support traditional marriage as a definition and a constitutional amendment go down, but 3 states actually actively approve gay marriage. So in Iowa, one time they were actually against. In the popular vote, there was a pro-traditional marriage amendment went down, but 2 years later it passed. So Minnesota is now technically the first on record who again, in an election where that typically benefited conservatives, for the first time, it actually it was a losing issue. And I think it's happening, Perry. It's the younger evangelicals inside our own movement, and it's because of society, like it or not. It's tough to go to college. It's tough to have a job and not come into contact, not whether social or business or family, with people who are gay. And then it gets politically uncomfortable, I think, and it can be, depending on the rhetoric, and in opposing. Because it's too tied to everyone. So I think the issue is going to be very important on church autonomy. And what I mean is that if this issue slips too far and it becomes a real civil rights issue and treated kind of like a racial issue, then that can have a direct impact on the ability of a pastor just to orally speak about it. Churches don't always agree with everything that's legal or constitutional. You can still believe it's immoral to do something. But when it gets into that civil rights world or hate speech, you see where this is going. So I think we're going to have to double down efforts on protecting the free speech rights of pastors on these moral issues, and making sure that these churches will never be forced, regardless of where the law is going. There's big cases that'll be at the Supreme Court, Perry, on the Defense of Marriage Act, which, it's questionable how well that will go, that these churches won't be forced to have to, perform them. And again, you may say, why would that happen? Well, if it goes too much of a civil rights issue, you can see where it goes from free speech to hate speech very quickly in the government's definition. Yeah,
especially with the possible turnover in the Supreme Court. Let me come back to the fairness doctrine then. I mean, you're a broadcaster, we're a broadcaster, and on the free speech, this administration seems to be hostile against talk radio. Are we in trouble?
I am always interested to watch. The second term can always be a little bit more revenge on, and they kind of held back. We have relationships with people inside the Obama administration when it comes to foreign policy, also human rights. When it comes to Christian persecution, we work with the State Department. So this is not some statement, but I'm talking about the political officials within, not the people who dedicate their life to service. And not necessarily all of the political officials, but this is when people like the Department of Justice, who you've been people have been very critical of. Holder may go, but they come into place. You start seeing some things happen. they just get much less concerned about the political ramifications. Think about what the Obama team and the president have gone through already and gotten reelected.
Yeah.
So if they can get through Fast and Furious, get through the healthcare law, get through the Supreme Court, all of these issues, the economy being in trouble, Benghazi, foreign policy issues, the list goes on, and now they don't have to worry about reelection. Imagine what if that was them holding back, imagine what their real policies are.
Well, that being said, so do you see the fairness doctrine coming at us?
I think it's these regulations won't ever be called that. They've taken it out of the books, which they did for political purposes. That was a good thing, I think, but we have to watch them extremely closely. I could see a backlash, but they may think, you know what, they're doing their job and turning out the vote. Maybe it's actually helping them, to have these conservatives out there who are scaring people away, as we've been talking about. Maybe the messaging has gone to where it's actually good to have them out there so they can use the audio and the video to use in ads.
All right, we saw some churches and pastors go directly after the First Amendment this go around and get up and endorse people to challenge a pastor's right to do that. And if some of these other things you talked about become law, where all of a sudden it turns to hate speech for them to get up and preach against same-sex marriages, what's in for the pulpits of America?
It's interesting. Those pastors did that. The IRS has never actively stripped a tax-exempt status from a church because of an instance like that, a one-time incident. And so, I think that the IRS saw it probably as, a one-time or at least a once every few years thing. It's not a pattern. Still, there could be issues for some of these pastors later. Some people said, look, nothing happened to them. Well, the government and the bureaucracy doesn't work that quick. So you'll see the groups on the other side of these issues, Perry, try to file lawsuits, whether it's Americans United for Separation of Church and State, against some of them. So they're not, I don't think, completely in the clear. We have always supported the free speech rights of pastors, but have also been honest that, the law is if fairly clear that you're putting at least in jeopardy. It's not definite, but in jeopardy your tax-exempt status. On those kind of issues, again, I think churches have got to wake up to not just the most controversial issues like marriage, Perry, but issues just like pastors being able to speak freely and openly about every single ballot measure and things like that, because they're there to educate. People go to their pastor to learn. Most people don't have enough time to study, to think, and that's part of a pastor's job, is to set aside to know what's going on in the culture and respond to it.
Well, Jordan, you're a delight. Thank you for what you do. Your passion is infectious, and your organization is wonderful. Thanks for what you do. The best to you and your dad and your entire staff. And thanks for giving me a few extra moments this morning. We appreciate and value our relationship.
Thanks, Perry, and expect a couple of major Supreme Court nomination battles coming up over the next few years.
And we're counting on you guys to be there.
We'll be there. We'll be fighting.
Okay, pal. God bless. See you later.